Hello everyone, and thanks for showing up. My name is Anja Nylund Hagen, and I'm head of the department at Musicology here at the University of Oslo. And it's my big pleasure to warmly welcome you to this book launch. First, I want to thank the Library of the University of Oslo for hosting us, and to all of you for showing up here today. We are gathered to celebrate the publication Sound and Detention, which was released by Bloomsbury just before Christmas. This book grows out of a research project called Prisons of Note from the Department of Musicology, and has the editorial team Anja Mangaoang, who is associate professor and project leader of Prisons of Note, and also postdoctoral researcher Lucy Frödén, and Dr. Kate Herrity, who's a criminologist. So they have brought together an extraordinary collection of work. Sound and Detention, towards a critical listening, sonic citizenship and social justice, includes contributions from 5 continents and has more than 40 chapters. The geographic and disciplinary breadth is remarkable. And as head of the Department of Musicology, and also someone who often speaks about the many reasons we need music and musicologists, I'm very proud and grateful for this contribution. The book matters, and I would like to underline 3 reasons why. First, it deepens our understanding of how music and sound affect people. The effects of sound are not uniform. They depend on who we are, on the context, and on the kind of music or sound involved. People in detention are not a homogeneous group, and the broad perspective of this anthology makes that diversity visible. Music, or the absence of music and sound, can change lives. It can inflict harm and isolation, and it can also enable connection, healing, resistance, and dignity. The book's range is therefore crucial. It shows both how sound can be a tool of control and how it can be a resource for empowerment. The second reason why this book is important is because it advances a growing but still developing field of research. By bringing together work from different traditions and regions, the editors are positioning themselves and this anthology at the center of an emerging scholarly conversation. And I think this conversation will shape research on sound, imprisonment, and social justice for years to come. And the third reason why this book is important is because it has democratic and policy relevance. Understanding music and sound in carceral settings does more than expand academic knowledge. It speaks directly to public policy, prison practice, and human rights. Research like this can inform political and practical decisions, and importantly, reframe music not merely as a cultural policy tool or thing, but matter as justice and human dignity. So this book invites us to listen differently, to attend to power relations encoded in sound, to the silences and absences, and to the ways that sonic practices can both oppress and liberate. So I want to close by thanking one more time the editors, Anja, Katie, and Lucy, and everyone who contributed to this anthology. Thank you also, all of you who are here today, to soon enter the stage, which through attention, questions, and your presence will contribute to positioning this book into both the current and the future public conversation. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much, Anja, and thank you everybody for being here today. It's an absolute joy and a privilege to welcome you here today to the launch of our book, Sound and Detention. My name is Áine Mangaoang, and I'm an associate professor here at the Department of Musicology at the University of Oslo. And I'm here together with my colleagues Lucy Cathcart Frödén and Kate Herrity. I'm going to just start this introduction with giving you a little bit of background about how this book came to be, and then I'll hand over to each of my colleagues to say a few words as well. So like many collaborative projects, this book's origins go back quite some time. Over a decade ago, during my PhD research, I first learned about music in prison through researching a Philippine prison's unique music and dance program. A few years later, at a symposium on music and detention at Oxford University, the exact year of which neither Kate or I can exactly remember, it was that long ago, we first shared notes and talked about how there was this massive gap in research about music in detention and sound in detention, despite the fact that we knew there was a lot of people working in this area, a lot of people doing research, but there just hadn't really been any publications on this topic. The two of us continued this conversation for another few years, back and forth across timelines and temporary contracts. And it took a little bit longer. It took the external funding from the Norwegian Research Council to be able to buy out time for myself to get this book off the ground. And this Young Researcher Talent Award from the Norwegian Research Council allowed me to have a project called Prisons of Note that Anja mentioned. And it was through that Lucy and I first crossed paths. So we had the good fortune to collaborate together for the last 3 years on doing research on music in detention in Norway, Ireland, and Iceland. Along the way, we also got some much needed research assistance from Noah Kroksholm, who is over there. So thank you so much, Noah, for your help along the way. Because, of course, when you write these project grants and applications, it seems like a really good idea to do it across 3 countries. And then you have to do it, and it becomes a lot harder to actually do that when you're one person. So I'm very grateful to the two of these collaborators. And especially to each and every one who we met along the way. We were so privileged that so many people entrusted us with their songs and stories of what music and sound means to them in their lives. So we are incredibly grateful and thankful to all of you who helped with this research. Our book, Sound and Detention, then forms part of this work, although it also extends far beyond what this project could possibly hold. In our initial sketches for the book, the 3 of us editors were unanimous that our anthology would invite contributions from early career and leading scholars in the fields of musicology, sound studies, criminology, and more, as well as artists and practitioners, both currently and formerly incarcerated. The final result is actually 22 chapters. Sorry, Anja, it's not quite 40, but it's 22. But we did have over 40 authors included, so there was a lot of collaborations and co-writing happening. And they represent all of these fields and perspectives, as well as being located in many corners of the world, including India, Australia, Greece, Gaza. And some of our authors occupy a great many different positions. Some are tenured academics, some cannot be named due to prison regulations that forbid such actions. One of our authors is currently on death row in the United States. A stark, sobering reminder that the number of executions is rising globally, despite many countries abolishing capital punishment. This diversity of outlooks and lived experiences is, if I may say, quite a notable achievement in itself. It was hard. It took a lot of work. But it also does speak to our desire to bridge academic and public discourse, and to our hope, our very deep hope, to shape future research and policy on sound and detention. Lucy and I have been gratified to learn that some of our research through Prisons of Note has been cited in both Norwegian and Icelandic parliamentary debates around the importance of sustained investment in such initiatives. So we sincerely hope that this new book can help add further evidence and inspire positive action on this front. So for today, we've carefully curated a special programme to invite you to tune into some of the sounds, some of the songs, and some of the stories from our work in prisons and beyond. We share with you today 2 short films that stem from the book and from the Prisons of Note project more broadly. The first features the voices of In-House Harmony, a very unique inside-outside choir based in Mountjoy Prison, Dublin. The choir collectively wrote chapter 6 of our book, A Choir's Journey, Belonging in a Prison Setting, sharing with us readers what it takes to join and sustain a prison choir from the inside and outside. In between this film, we will have a conversation on some of the book's themes with Caroline Jones, one of the founders of this choir who's joined us from Dublin, and Sveinung Sandberg, a professor here from criminology based at the University of Oslo. After this, we'll hear from our colleague Audun Reithaug from Musik i fengsel og frihet, who will share with us a short reflection on the occasion of their 35th anniversary. And we will end with a joyful screening about a wonderful band of women who are based here in Oslo, who tell us how it feels to make music together during and after serving time inside. It's our hope that these songs, conversations, and our book will help bring to life what sound and music can mean to people in prison and to those on the path to freedom. In these most dark days, it is all the more vital that we look for alternatives to punitive prison systems, and that we should strive for the humane, for what is true and for what is needed. And so on that note, I'm going to pass over to my colleague Lucy, who will give you a bit more details on the book.
Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to our Bokbad. Thank you so much for coming. It's amazing to see you here. My name is Lucy. I've been introduced twice already, so I don't really need to tell you that. But it's been my pleasure and my honour to be part of bringing this book together. It's part of a growing body of work on this theme of sonic citizenship, exploring how people find ways to belong to each other through sound, despite systemic injustice. And I'd like to say just a little bit about what this looks like and sounds like in the book. So, researching and making art in prison spaces is ethically fraught. We know that prisons cause harm, that incarceration disproportionately affects people of colour, neurodiverse people, people who have been affected by trauma. And we know that arts-based projects can mitigate some of the pain of imprisonment and bring potential for relationships and creative expression and self-development. But we also know that prisons often co-opt these creative projects to justify and sanitize their own punitive regimes. So there are no simple answers in this complex territory, and the book is definitely not saying prisons would be fine if they just had more music. Instead, over 40 contributors share complex stories of imprisonment, exile, and separation that are also stories of listening, imagination, resonance, and hope. We hear from Habtat Zerejki, Tesfalam Yemane, and Hiab Johannes, artists and scholars in forced displacement from Eritrea, about how music and art can be a way to aesthetically resist the unfreedom of coloniality. We hear from Anthony Rodd, who's currently incarcerated in the US, about how collaboration makes a place for me to be part of a broader conversation than I previously imagined possible. He recognises this as a source of healing for all involved, and he speculates that, and I quote, "the doors opened lead beyond what we can yet see or hear." The book doesn't only make connections across disparate geographies and cultures, but also across time. Anna Papaeti takes us to Greece under the dictatorship in the 70s, sharing stories of how singing together brought friendship and hope to incarcerated women, bridging the divide between political prisoners and mainstream prisoners. We have Lara Quickler Moriarty and Cristina Palomares Toledano, who unfold for us the protest songs of women incarcerated under the Franco regime in Spain. And we have Christina Hasbun, who takes us to a speculative future time of peace and justice in Jerusalem. Her poetic intervention asks, how many years did it take us to be able to sit here, sipping our Arabic coffee with cardamom? Can you hear? Can you hear the church bells of the Holy Sepulchre? They are all tolling together, marking the 30th anniversary of our liberation. They're tolling for the killed, for the kidnapped, for the disappeared, for the detained, who, like rivers of sound, sang their way out from the big prison that was. As you can surely hear, this is a book that takes creative practice seriously, recognising the hard work of reimagining our world into a shape where everybody is safe and everybody can thrive. So alongside critical scholarly texts from academic colleagues, we also invited creative and experimental writing from artists and activists and practitioners, some themselves incarcerated. In academic circles, we talk a lot about epistemology, which is really just a fancy word for ways of knowing things. And in the book, we've sought to embrace an expansive epistemology. We recognise the vital knowledge that is present in the body, in stories from ancestors, in the natural world, and in songs, poems, and stories. We've tried to stretch the academic format so that historically silenced voices, narratives, and forms of knowledge can find a place in this book. Finally, what would a book about sound be without sound? The book also includes a rich audio archive that we're excited about. These include field recordings from Washington, D.C. jail, songs written in an inside-outside songwriting project, an album recorded on death row in North Carolina, a digital storytelling production from Uganda, an audio essay on music and migration across the Mediterranean, and poetry and sound art from prisons in the UK. And including these as part of the fabric of the book is a way of bringing the text to life. And it's also a way to continue raising questions about audibility, authorship, and power. So we hope that these situated sonic artifacts and the book as a whole might help us to tune in to things that we might not have heard before. When we think in the abstract sense about prisons, we primarily use the visual imagination. We see in our mind's eye the high walls and the barbed wire. But when we tune in with the sonic imagination, to sounds and music originating in spaces of detention, the walls suddenly become more porous, and connection, we believe, becomes possible. Over to you, Kate.
We conceptualize a listening that does not objectify, does not point to an object as if it is distant from the speaking subject or absent from the speaking place. A listening that reflects on itself and can come very close to a subject without, however, seizing or claiming it. Listening nearby. The book's introduction is also so entitled, and in it we argue that adopting this approach brings us closer. Listening immerses us in the world, where seeing removes us from it, relies on physical contact, where seeing requires physical distance, as Hector McInnes contends. Listening nearby is relational. Over the next several years, we unraveled the intricate relationship between sound and architecture within 42 carceral spaces. Shifting our focus from music in prisons to soundscapes of the jail, we recognized the potential for a deeper understanding of the carceral experience through sound. We all became students of the soundscape. Learning became relational, as Benjamin Harbert, Joel Caston, and Michael Woody explain. And sound and music, listening nearby, celebrates agency. I was just playing birdsong, but sound can be really powerful. It can make a person reflect on their sound being, as Justin Wigan and I expound in our chapter. One of the most exciting aspects of this project for me was the opportunity it presented to work with my wonderful colleagues, Lucy and Anja, at the crossroads between musicology, sound studies, and criminology. In criminology, specifically in prisons research, we do not talk about these things enough. In England and Wales, where our incarcerated population rockets, education budgets have been cut by up to 50%. Now, more than ever, it is important to recognise arts and creativity more broadly as not a nice-to-have, but intrinsic to humanity, to fashioning technologies of the self, and to survival, even thriving in these Spartan spaces. We invite you to contemplate the aching silence of their absence, and invite our readers to listen more deeply in an environment where hearing can be the only source of information and risk assessment. Music becomes his bridge, a tether between displacement and possibility, a fragile articulation of belonging in a world that refuses to accommodate him. But sound is never neutral. It carries histories of violence. It registers absence and it disrupts imposed silences, as Chrissy Karatsu and Fiona Murphy explain. Sound and Detention, then, is a call to listen more attentively and to appreciate more deeply the complex and manifold effects of sound and music for people in confinement. In so doing, we provide suggestion and emphatic encouragement for those who wish to follow and take these ideas in new directions in teaching as well as research. The book is about music and sound in places and practices of confinement, but is as much concerned with the search for connection, the centrality of making and maintaining relationships in situations of intense fragmentation, pressure, and threat to sense of identity and belonging. In a very real sense, then, Sound and Detention is about the business of being human in times and places of fracture and polarization. It has rarely been more important to attend to these issues, and so we come together in a space to make connections of our own through discussion, through sharing ideas and listening nearby. Thank you.
Okay, so we are going to show you now the first of our two films. Do you guys want to sit in the front? Because it's going to be really annoying to kind of crane your back. Okay, so I mentioned very briefly in my introduction that we worked closely with a choir in Mountjoy Prison in Dublin, and we're so proud that this choir collectively wrote a chapter in our book. And so to give you a little bit of background and a bit more insight into this choir, we have this short film, very short, just 4 minutes long, that will tell you some of their stories about what it means for them to sing in a choir in a prison. So I hope you will enjoy. I'm not sure if it's possible to turn down the lights on this stage just for a few. No, okay. We will persevere.
None of us could sing. We were all crap. They started singing and we were like,
a hungry feeling.
oh my God, they're really good. And we are so bad.
Came on me stealing.
I've been locked up since I was 15. I'd never seen so many women in my life other than on telly. And all of a sudden I was there and I was like, all right, just be cool. I felt a bit awkward, felt unsure of myself, because when you develop how to be a woman, it was just men.
Here we are, a group of middle-aged handbag clutchers heading into the joy. I didn't think I was going in with any preconceived ideas, but I now know that my unconscious assumptions were that these would be people I wouldn't have anything in common with. And how wrong was I?
I remember some of the lads saying, we're just being used, being wheeled out, or like entertainment monkeys. I remember some people using those kind of terms, and I kind of turned it back on them to say, well, you're very talented, like you're very good singers, and I think they love performing now, and they realise their own worth.
bit skeptical because I wasn't into gospel music and all that type of stuff. Yeah, it's a week or two, and I was like, you know what, I'll come up and give it a bash. So when I went in, and then I was just saying all the girls, and I was like, oh shit. But the more I went up, the more I started talking to the girls, and it's like, they're actually all right. And then like, yeah, I just got very friendly with them, and then it just changed my whole perception of the way people think of me.
Okay, thank you very much for our first film. We're going to, yeah, thank you. Okay, so we're so proud and so honoured that we have one of the founders of this choir here with us today, Caroline Jones. So please come and join us for this roundtable conversation, as well as Sveinung Sandberg. Please come and sit up here too, if you'd be so kind. And we're going to just have a small conversation. I'm going to scooch in here.
So you've had a proper introduction to three of us here on the stage, but I'd just like to say a couple of words to welcome Caroline and Sveinung to join us in this conversation. So Caroline is one of the driving forces behind the choir that you just met, and yeah, we've been working together for a few years now and had an incredible time together. Caroline's official title is People Engagement Manager at Solace, which is the Irish kind of state agency for adult education and training. But she's also got a background in youth and community work, and has studied sociology, and has all these many kind of strings to her bow that she brings to Oslo today. So it's great to have you, Caroline.
Thank you.
Sveinung is joining us from not quite as far away, just across town from the criminology department. He's a professor of criminology here at the University of Oslo, with a particular interest in narrative and life stories, and how those play out in the context of prisons. And he's just finishing off a huge project looking at crime in Latin America, and about to start a new huge project, which is even more international than the last, and researching in many different countries, and also exploring these questions of narrative and life story, and the kind of stories that, how people narrate their own lives, I guess, across these kinds of experiences. So there's a lot of really interesting experience on the panel today, and I'm excited to be able to moderate this conversation. I'm going to start with a couple of questions to get us started, and then I think we'll just let things flow until the time runs out. But Sveinung, I'd like to start with you. As I mentioned, you've thought a lot about narrative and about life stories in criminology, and although your main focus is not music related, I think music has come up repeatedly in the research that you've done. And it'd be really interesting just to hear a little bit about that, and whether there's any threads that you recognise overlapping between the book and your own research.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, and thanks for letting me read a book before it was out. It's an amazing book, I have to say. As an outsider, I can say this, right? I was so impressed by how many different perspectives you managed to get in there. It's like a bricolage of different kinds. It's almost not like an edited volume, but more like a kind of just bricks and pieces from all over the place, like poetry and interviews and more scholarly text, and it's all just mixed together. So you're always wondering in the next chapter, what's this one going to be about? Like the continuous surprises. So congrats on that amazing book. To go to your question, So we had this big project in Latin America, and my background, as opposed to many of you, I guess, and you, it's not a genuine interest in music or like a scholarly professional approach to it, but it's more like I play a little bit of guitar for my kids to make them sleep. And then 15 years ago, I did research on ethnographic research on the street, and a lot of the drug dealers there were also doing hip hop. So I wrote a little bit about hip hop 15 years ago. And we had this new project in Latin America. It wasn't a word about music in the proposal. I hadn't thought about it for a second until I arrived in some of these prisons, and there was just music everywhere. It's not the same in Norway, I mean, but when you enter the prison, it's like a loudspeaker playing music there all over the place. There's a choir at one place singing there, and it's just, the soundscape is just so different from Norwegian prisons that I was just amazed, and I thought immediately, okay, there is something going on here. And then we started interviewing, and we had several interviews where music came up in different ways. So in one interview, a woman had used a lot of glue, so she had forgotten a lot of stuff. She couldn't remember how many kids she had, and so on. But she was singing, like in between, talking a little bit, singing a little bit. And after the interview, we thought, okay, this is just nonsense. We're not going to get anything out of this. And then we started to put together the lyrics from the songs with what she was saying. And then if you put the two of them together, it kind of makes a life story out of it. So she was kind of using music to remember her life or tell her life. And others were a guy I interviewed in Chile. He was just talking about how he was into rock, and then he sang a rock song, and how he was dancing this kind of particular dance, and he was singing this song, and then he became religious, and he started to singing his religious songs. And at one point I asked him, okay, so what's your favorite song? And he said, it's this Over the Rainbow. And then he started singing that one, and that was the first one I knew. so we sang it together. It was kind of a nice bonding experience. And then some others who in isolation made songs like choreo, like more traditional Latin American music. And he would only sing for himself, but when he was in isolation, he sang, and the other prisoners would clap afterwards. It was kind of emotion work. And another hip-hop artist who was more kind of, okay, I want to be a big artist, can you be my manager? And I said, no, probably not, but I can try to play your music whenever I can. So if I have a talk, I try to play that music. He was smuggling in equipment into the prison, had a producer in the prison, and then he had a YouTube channel. Because I said, can you sing something for me? Yeah, I can sing, but you should listen to stuff on my YouTube channel. I was like, okay. And that's like in the middle of nowhere in a Mexican prison. So I saw a couple of similarities, and I think the first one is this section 1, where you describe how it makes life easier in prison. So for the guy in isolation who had, of course, huge psychological problems, attempted suicides, terrible life history, he genuinely used this kind of music to kind of overcome these traumas by singing. But he also had a lot of political criticism. So one of the songs is about how these maximum security units are built by the US and so on. So it's kind of also touching upon your section 2, where it's more about resistance and narratives of resistance and this kind of collective criticism. So I think there are many similarities in terms of kind of overcoming things and kind of surviving in very hostile conditions. And when the book turns towards the more negative effects, like the Mandela chapter and so on, where kind of, okay, sounds can also be a form of torture, I was thinking, okay, this music, when I entered the prison, it was often very upbeat, like, bam, bam. I was like, well, that's fun. I mean, and then I was thinking, okay, but if this goes on for 24 hours a day, I mean, that's torture. Yeah. So I think there is something there too. And then I think maybe the main that touches upon both the stuff we have done in music from that project, but also another project we have where we try to look into we have asked a lot of criminologists, because we always write about the bad stuff, right? Why does crime happen? Where does all this harm come from? What's the causes? How does it come about? So we asked a lot of fellow criminologists to go back to their own old research and look into the good stuff. So is there anything good in these terrible places. And we hadn't done that before. And then I thought, okay, but this book here, for some reason, it's about such terrible stuff, terrible condition, but it's all in a very kind of hopeful, it's all written in a very hopeful way. I mean, that you can see, maybe there is a way out of it, maybe there is something good out there. So I think that's a very important similarity too, that you do much better than we do, because we are always so oriented towards the problem, right? Yeah. So amazing book. Thanks for letting me read it. Yeah.
Thank you. That's so interesting to hear. And I think, that question about the balance of dark and light is one that we've talked about a lot in the editorial process, because there's so much pain and suffering and darkness in prisons. But in order to try to imagine a world without prisons, we have to try and find, where are the sparks of light? Where are the possibilities? Where are the things that people are experiencing that bring healing or some kind of restoration? And that takes me to you and the choir, Caroline. You have contributed, along with the choir, a chapter to the book. And it would be really interesting to hear both a little bit about your experience of the choir, which we've just seen 3.5 minutes of, that might give people a little taster. Both about your experience of the choir, but also what was it like to try to write something together in such restrictive conditions, to try to share authorship with members of the choir who are in prison when there's been so much restriction in recent times?
Thanks, Lucy. I'm still sort of trying to breathe here to get over the emotional impact of when you get to the end and you see, and I think for any of us, I know we were talking this morning that you're finished, kind of a 3-year, and when you get to know somebody, like things happen within that space, and when it's just gone and taken away, there's a huge emotional impact on everybody involved in that loss. So I think my experience of the choir has been like phenomenal. It's probably one of the most all around emotional processes I've ever been in my life, but mostly positive. But I think, for the last year, the people from outside and inside have gone through a huge grief process in terms of the loss. And I suppose the choir started really accidentally. I had started a workplace choir to try and equalise our organisation. I said my background is in youth and community work. When I came into this space that was so hierarchical as a public sector body, I found it really difficult to exist within it. So I was looking for ways that we could equalise the grade system within that in the organisation. And our organisation fund prison education across the state of Ireland. So we were doing a TEDx talk. It was the first TEDx talk that had happened in a prison in Ireland. And the person who was organised that knew the choir was happening in Sulis and said, would you like to come in to the prison and sing? And my sister happens to be a probation officer, and she said to me, there's a men's choir in Mountjoy, which I didn't know. So I went back to this communications director and said, look, if there's a men's choir, they're the people that should be singing. We shouldn't be singing, they should be singing. So she said, no, the prison authorities thought it would be really good for the public sector body. So anyway, loads went on, and we negotiated that we would try and collaborate, which we did. The men practiced songs and we practiced the same songs, and then we came together for an hour before the TEDx talk and put it all together. So it was a bit like the ballroom of romance. The men were on one side and the women were on the other, and we kind of had to integrate. And in fairness, some of the women that I worked with were quite terrified going into a prison because they'd never been in or had that experience before. So it was quite interesting. And I'd scared the living daylights out of them by saying, I'd been in prisons a couple of times before in my previous role, and I was saying, don't bring your bag, don't wear jewellery, don't do blah, blah, blah. So they were terrified they were going to be robbed. I was only trying to help them get through the screening process quickly and efficiently, but I had forgotten to say that. And during that day when we were talking and interacting, again, in my innocence, I was sitting on the ground talking to a guy. I said, God, we've really vibed here. It's really nice. Would you be allowed out to do a fundraiser? And they looked at me as about 27 heads and said, look, we all have very long sentences, so no, we won't be allowed out. So from that moment then, I went home trying to figure out what can we do together. And I said, I think we might make a CD. We'll try and make a CD. So I was only new in the organisation and went around asking people, can I make a CD? And people just kept fobbing me off and sending me to somebody else. And I sat down at the end of the day feeling very dejected until it dawned on me that nobody had actually said no. Nobody had said yes, but nobody had said no either. So I just did it. So Lucy has, we the men decided on a charity that they wanted to contribute if we made any money from the CD. And they wanted, it was a homeless charity in Dublin. So we raised about €28,000 as a result of the CD, which they were very happy to do. But I suppose to get back to the choir and what it did and what it didn't do, and you've experienced it. I think, Kate, you talked about relational, you talked about safety, you talked about trust, and I will talk about emotion within it. So I think, as I said, it was a ballroom of romance, and my background of youth and community work came in. We were like, don't touch me, stay away from me. We had been told in the prison, you know, you need to be cautious and careful. But we couldn't do it if we didn't have a sense of freedom, or that we felt safe enough to be able to touch off each other when you're standing in very close proximity singing. So the choir evolved into 3 component parts. The first part was actually group work, where we literally played games of youth and community games where you had to figure out solutions, but it involved safe touching, if you know what I mean. It might be getting in hula hoops, managing, skipping things, building things together, but it became much closer. And that was formed a part of every choir day. We did something that was interactive, and the possibility of hitting off somebody, or, you know, like when your kid's pushing and shoving, you know, that kind of stuff. So that took place. Then we had our rehearsal. And again, the men were amazing singers. They were much better than us, and they'd been practicing for a lot longer. So they had to be really patient with us until we caught up with them. And that dynamic in terms of trust, being patient, kind of developed within that. And the final part, and I think each part was as important as the other, was like the family sit down that we finished every session and around a table where we ate food, drank tea, and had conversations about whatever emerged. And I think I'm really interested in well-being and psychological safety. And as part of the choir, we had started to measure the mental health well-being using the Edinburgh Warwick mental health well-being scale. Really interestingly, the women in our organisation had lower mental health wellness than the men in the prison had. But by the end, when we kind of completed, we kept on redoing the survey for a couple of years. We had gone up by about 6 percentage points, which is quite good. But everybody had like equalised within that choir. And then we started looking at you know, how can you interact with people who are very different from you? And we kept being told, you cannot have relationships with these people, you're professionals and they're in prison. And that just wasn't happening. Like, the relationships were forming, and it was really difficult to justify them. Like, you're talking about oppression, you're talking about power, talking about privilege, and you know that the people coming in have had a lot more of that. But yet these relationships were continuously forming. The intimacy that was being created, and like I would say ethical intimacy, where we were sharing with each other, but we did share with each other. We didn't hold back as professionals. So if they were talking about their children, I'd be talking about my children, you know, if something was going on. So it became that melting pot where we could have those relationships. And the music benefited from that, because that sense of safety, if you made a mistake, nobody was being assessed. It didn't matter who made mistakes. And I'm sure it's the same in all prisons, but there's continuous monitoring all of the time within the prison, whereas in this space we weren't monitoring each other, we were actually just working together. So I think I know it was one of the days I was saying, it was just the shared purpose that we had. And as Áine just mentioned, third space, which I'd completely forgotten about from my own background. And I think we created that third space, and that church that you saw there with the very famous stained glass windows by a person called Harry Clark, I think is his name. We created that third space, and possibly I think there's now a move towards a fifth space where you leave everything belonging to like your family, relationships, career, education, and you come in where you can just be you. You're not somebody who studies something, you're not somebody's son, daughter, you're not, you know, you haven't got some title in a job. You come to this space. So it became kind of like a quiet resistance to what was happening within the prison. And we were allowed to do that. And one of the men in the prison had said to me, you can do what you want and you can't. And we absolutely learned that lesson a very hard way. And just very quickly in relation to writing, one is, like, I created conditions but didn't do anything. That, you know, we all did it. The writing of the book chapter, I always feel complete guilt in a way around that, because it was one of the men in the prison, who is not allowed to be named, who wrote the most amazing chapter, but he wasn't allowed to send it. And we tried every which way for him to be able to, and it was so positive, it was so kind and generous to the prison authorities in Ireland, but he wasn't allowed, so it was going to just die. So himself and myself, we were still in the prison, said, okay, well, what if I input and give my skill side to it that's different than yours? He came from quite an academic background. I think he had just completed a master's and was starting to progress into a PhD. And I probably softened some of it from my background. So we did it together. And then, as anybody who works in prisons knows, there's loads of different ways to interact with people outside of formal channels, that whether it's through family, which is the way we've done it mostly. It was one of the biggest things about the choir, that their families became involved, because they were invited to every performance, and both choirs' families came, so everybody integrated. So it wasn't a them and us ever within the prison. And I know there's huge loss across the prison. And I think I was just saying earlier to Áine and Lucy, I'm probably one of the only people, as the men in the prison keep saying, they all want to get out and I want to get in. But I'm just not allowed in, and that's all there is to it at the moment. But we tried then, I managed to get funding so that the men could continue the choir in the prison, but that's also been refused. So it's just a lack of will. And we can show that it has mental health positive outcomes. We can show the psychological safety that develops when people have access to something that's different, that allows you to I suppose, to understand what's not being said in the saying, what's not happening in the happening. You start to see all of those things and be able to have conversations at a very real kind of guttural level with people, where they can express their emotion without fear, where they can challenge you and be challenged without fear. If they say the wrong thing or antagonize somebody, they're going to pay a price for it. And unfortunately, that is my experience within the prison setting. As somebody who has a lot of power and privilege in her own life, that you are 100% powerless when it comes to operating in any way in a closed organisation like the prison service. And the experience, as I say, is we're gone. That's.
Thank you, Caroline. There's so much to unpack there. Certainly something that we've experienced in going into lots of different prisons, particularly in the UK and Ireland, is that each prison seems to be its own little kingdom, and the governor kind of decides a lot of what happens there. And if you want to do something that is not approved by them, then there's just no way of doing it. When I talk to people about the choir and how amazing it was and how life-changing it was and how it's now ended, people's first question is always, oh, did the funding run out? And it's nothing to do with that. That's all the conditions are in place for it to continue, but the prison just won't allow it, which is just mind-boggling that can happen. I want to move around to Kate, and I think a connection here is this field of sensory criminology, which, Kate, you've been at the forefront of developing. Áine and I, in our experiences in Mountjoy Prison with you guys, had such a powerful kind of embodied experience of singing together, and the goosebumps and the hairs on the back of your neck raising up, and all of those kind of emotions that come up. And we've ended up writing about that for a new handbook that Kate's put together along with colleagues, Jason, who's here, and a couple of other colleagues, which is coming out in a couple of months' time. February
next month.
So yeah, it feels like this work is kind of spreading and threading through lots of different places. But Kate, tell us a little bit about sensory criminology, first of all, for the musicologists in the room who might not be familiar with that field, and also a little bit about your chapter in the book that you wrote with sound artist Justin Wigan, because it's also super exciting.
I was motivated first off many years ago when I did my undergrad, and I was looking specifically at the significance of music for people in prison. And that led when I was talking to people about the way music had featured in the various stages of their prison sentence, their fashioning of hope for the future beyond the prison walls, the way music operated often as a social tactic inside, either sharing it, modulating the feel of the space, that kind of thing. But people frequently referred to sound more broadly. And that coincided with my own first experience of visiting a prison, which was Wandsworth, where I stood at the central control point, and there was just this overwhelming sea of noise. And I wanted to know what that did, what that meant, what effect that had, what was the significance for people who live and work in those spaces. But of course, sound is part of a far broader palette of experience, the way we make sense of the world, which is primarily sensorially. You walk into a cafe, you smell the coffee, you hear the chairs and tables fidgeting on the floor, you taste the food that you're sharing, perhaps indulging in commensality, which is something else there is very little opportunity for in some prisons. Certainly in England and Wales, you can't easily sit down and break bread together, which is a really fundamental human thing. So I'm interested in all those things, and just to point out, you have both contributed a beautifully written, really evocative chapter on the hearth and the way that signifies warmth, togetherness in these cold, stark places. Is a really affecting chapter, so thank you. So we've been collaborating all over the place. As far as sound specifically goes, part of what interests me about sound, and music specifically, but sound more broadly, is the way it allows us to transcend and traverse different spaces, connections, relationships, our sense and experience of a place, as well as our imaginings of what it is comprised of. Prisons in particular have very evocative, specific soundscapes. They vary country to country, population to population. It's another thing that I'm quite interested in doing, actually, is comparing a sort of a form of sensory comparative penology, because actually bound up in the way people are able to enact and engage in social rhythms of life is profoundly restricted or enabled by the prison regimes and the broader penal culture to which they are subject. So prisons in Norway sound and feel very, very different to prisons in England and Wales, which is a separate jurisdiction from Scotland. Particularly because a lot of our prisons are Victorian and clangy and bangy and jangly, and they feel enclosing. We were having a conversation, Caroline and I, before I probably went in my usual scattergun way onto something completely different, specifically about the Old Triangle, which I'm sure you all know, but in case anyone doesn't, the Old Triangle is itself specifically about Mountjoy Prison, and the triangle that was hung from, I think, the doorway, the outer gate, to signify different points of the regime, but could be heard all along the banks of the Royal Canal. And so the song is itself evocative of not only the prison, but the signification of that prison, of community, belonging, political identity. And the Old Triangle is a song that has various iterations. If you spend time listening to rebel music, sooner or later the Old Triangle will come up. And I, in my book, Sound, Order and Survival, which is specifically about the soundscape of a specific prison in England, I have a chapter called Jingle Jangle, and I include all the words to the Old Triangle specifically because it's a really direct, accessible way of talking about the way that soundscape and imaginings of it transcend particular time, space, and experience, and reconfigure our sense of what the prison is. So it was my curiosity about sound that brought me into conversation with Justin, and I met him on LinkedIn. Actually, I was introduced to him via LinkedIn, which is how once upon a time, before Musk ruined Twitter, academic Twitter was a great place to be. Now all we have is LinkedIn. We were introduced by somebody who had worked with Justin in Whitemoor, and Justin does a whole array of stuff. He's like a joyous, creative agent of chaos. So it was quite interesting to work with him. He has, since we worked together, built sound benches for alpacas. He's now working on steam compositions in saunas. And it was really interesting and exciting to work with him, but also quite challenging because we come from quite distinct places. But I'm sort of, because I have an interest in sound and it isn't shared by a huge number of people in my field, I tend to get put in touch with all manner of random, and Justin is one of those randoms who is now one of my people.
Yeah.
And you wrote a beautiful chapter together, so we have this included in our book, and we're so happy to have this really experimental idea of what you can do, the idea of sound passports and introducing critical listening inside of a prison and how that empowers people to take ownership and feel a sense of some sort of sense of control over their space when you have very little in this kind of environment. Yeah.
There's also a connection with what you were talking about, Sveinung, about the lady who used music to remember her life. There was in that project, there was a part of it involved thinking about sounds and memories and recollections, and whether it's the sound of a kettle boiling or a door closing. These are really evocative things beyond music. The soundscape is also really important to talk about in this.
Well, in that, as Justin relayed frequently when he was talking to the men, and the FENS unit is the deep end of a high security prison where people are often convicted for quite serious offences and looking at very, very long sentences. One of the most recurring observations he had was that when prompted to remember soundscapes of home, all these men remembered their mum. Sounds of their mum, sounds of home.
Áine, I do want to bring you in briefly. I know that we're quite short on time. I have done a bad job as a moderator, and I don't know what time we're meant to actually finish this conversation. We're
That's okay, I think.
5:30. Are we?
Yeah.
We edge it another couple of minutes.
We can.
I just wanted to bring in your sort of musicology chops, which are significant. Talk to us a little bit just about what music making can do, particularly collective music making in these kinds of punitive, restrictive spaces, and also thinking about transitions to leaving prison. Is there something about music and collectives of making music together that can ease that transition in some contexts?
Absolutely. I think for me that would have been one of the really wonderful things to find out through the course of the Prisons of Note project. We were so lucky to make contact with Music I Fengsel og Frihet, so this organisation who support music not only in prison but also support music making after prison. So you spend a lot of time in Norway encouraging people to take these opportunities that they have to learn how to play a musical instrument, to participate in bands or choirs or any kind of collective or personal music making opportunities. And for many people who I spoke with who had the opportunity to take up these offers, very often they expressed how this was the first time in their lives they've been offered this opportunity. People might have wanted to do this in their youth, in their teenage life, but the opportunities weren't there. So it was only when they went to prison and found this time on their hands that they had the space to actually participate in this kind of learning, and so many people flourished then. They had the opportunity to learn how to program, how to make beats, how to write songs, how to express themselves and really have this creative voice. And we're so lucky in Norway because this organisation exists that is seeing the value of this. And so they understood that when people come out of prison, because in Norway most people do come out, people very often want to keep making music. They don't just suddenly want to drop this. So they can support people through providing funding for studio spaces, rehearsal time, equipment, buying instruments or computers or things like this, to actually facilitate people keeping up these skills and keeping up these connections, because there's a lot of relationships that are built through this process. Any of us who've ever made music together with another person knows what a really special and intimate experience that can be to make music with another person, whether it's to sing together, play in a band, anything like this. And these kinds of positive relationships are what really help people. We all know this. Whenever we're feeling utterly awful, you want to reach out and connect with somebody in real life. And music is a really wonderful way to facilitate this. So we know that supporting people during prison is really important to have these opportunities, but equally when coming out, because in many ways, your support network completely evaporates when you come out, and it can be incredibly isolating. You can have lost a lot of network that you had before going into prison, and so the need for it is incredibly important, I think, on the way out too. So there isn't organisations like this in Norway, that we have in Norway, in Ireland and Iceland, that we found in our research, but we hope that through more awareness of these kinds of initiatives and how really shockingly simple they are to implement, that actually maybe more places might think about doing this, because it really isn't rocket science. It's actually quite straightforward, and it can make a really, really big difference. So that's been one of the really profound findings from our research, and from even a lot of the themes that have come out of the book as well.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. I think we're out of time, but it feels like this is a conversation that could go on for hours and hours. There's so many more things that I would like to ask you, but
well, we actually want to ask you if you have any questions.
Yeah,
so
yeah, absolutely.
This is the time.
I can run around with the microphone. Has anybody got anything that you would like to ask to a specific panel member? Or we've got Jason, hand up. Good stuff.
Well, thank you to everyone on the panel. One of the things I was interested in, this came up in what a number of the panelists have spoken about, but is the manner in which music is a way of politicizing emotion. And we see this in songs of resistance and revolutionary songs that have, throughout the kind of the 20th century. And I just wanted the panel to speak on this a little bit more, about either the problems of politicized music as it relates to prisons, or the benefits of politicized music as it relates to prisons.
Lucy?
Thank you. Who wants to jump in on that one?
Well, Lucy, I think actually you're probably really well placed to talk about this. Yeah. Do you have any?
I feel like there's so many thoughts swimming around in my brain that it's going a little bit, too many things to say. I guess sometimes we think of politics and emotion as two separate realms, and that's particularly the case if you perhaps come from a position of privilege where you haven't had to fight so much for survival. And I think what's useful about these kind of contexts that we're talking about music and about bringing the senses into the conversation, is that it does kind of automatically politicize the conversation, because we're talking about how people live their daily lives, under what conditions people are living, whether they have the capacity to survive, what relationships and connections they need and resources in order to survive. And so that immediately takes you into the realm of politics, particularly now, when we're talking about prisons being massively overcrowded and some very damaging things going on there. So in a way it seems kind of like a no-brainer that music and emotion and politics would kind of come together almost as three forces that that influence each other. And I think I guess something to bring in here is just one of the other case studies from our research together was in Iceland. We went to Iceland and we worked with this amazing community of people who are using kind of indigenous sweat lodge rituals, where you kind of have this really insane experience of going into this darkened, very hot, sweaty tent with like 25 other people, and you go through this kind of ritual of like chanting and singing songs from different places, and they bring into that, they brought in protest songs from different countries, they brought in connections to Palestine and what's happening in Gaza, and there was a sense of that kind of, even though this was a very kind of we were like, out in the Icelandic countryside, and it felt like a very isolated experience, but there was a sense of connection to ancestors and land and politics and music and personal expression, and all of these things seem to come together. And I think there's something about these contexts, like the choir, for example, and like Justin's project, where it creates an environment where these complex streams can kind of come to the surface and come into the conversation, and that cannot be anything but political, I think. I don't know if that makes any sense. Yeah. But yeah. More questions? Annette?
Thank you so much. I really can't wait to read this book. It's really an important book. I work in music and philosophy. I'm a professor in the same department as Anja. And I'm very interested, having just finished a chapter on free will and musicking, I'm interested, and I think this may be directed to you in particular, Caroline, I'm interested in the idea of freedom as self-determination, so music's power to enable that sense of freedom as self-determination. And you took me back to, I'll be fairly brief, a story about Al. So when I was at the University of Nottingham 12 years ago, I was involved with the In Harmony programme, the Arts Council England, where we, in the music department, we worked together with different schools in Nottingham. We brought children into the department to engage in music making with professional musicians. And so here comes that question. There was one girl, maybe 6, 7, 8 years old. She said one day, "When I play music, I feel free." And that sentence and that statement really was at the bottom of that program, trying to enable that sense of empowerment. And the question here is then, when funding is taken away from these wonderful initiatives that you experienced yourself, is that in these kingdoms that are the prisons, does that have something to do with music being too empowering, musicking, enabling that sense of freedom for those individuals who really should feel very unfree? I mean, thinking of the restorative effects is super important to keep this work going, right? But did you get a sense that there was that tension, that it was just too dangerous to enable them to music?
I think music does very much give people a sense of the self-determination. And I think in what we were working with, that absolutely very much happened. I think within that, people became much more confident in themselves. I think people had had difficulty sometimes in articulating issues or challenges that they faced, and they became much more assertive in being able to use language. And it was something, even through the music, that language became very important, because if somebody said something to me, as somebody who lived outside a prison who was female, I may react to something that was being said by men who had been incarcerated for long periods of time. And we had very challenging conversations, and how to conduct those conversations where you can either agree to disagree, but actually understand the other person's opinion. And people started to use that quite a lot, and to push back a little bit outside where they wouldn't previously have done. And I think that was the kind of, I think that there was the power of that people started to push back, and that wasn't welcomed. But another thing started to happen as well with people who worked in the prison, that literally on the day that the next day we were told we couldn't go back into the prison, prison officers had approached me to ask me, could we help them with their morale in the prison for their cohort of people, and do some of the things that we were doing with the choir, because the morale was so lifted, not only by men and in the chapter, you'll see it, men in the choir, but also people who weren't in the choir but became very much a part of our community. So if we guests coming in, they'd be wanting to be a part of it, to help you, bring people in, host them. You had people who wanted to cook, cater, you had people who wanted to be able to escort people in and out of the prison that weren't, so the community became much wider than the actual people who were singing in the choir. And I think that community was felt to be a danger, because people were becoming too confident and were asking and were questioning things that were happening in the prison. So that's, some of it was welcome. Like, some people were very progressive who worked in the prison and really were interested in having those conversations. But again, I think to take somebody's voice away, which is against the law in Ireland, you're entitled to freedom of speech, and could not put forward his chapter, which was very, as I say, supportive of people, and very grateful that he was allowed to be a part of the choir and what that brought. And he just wasn't allowed. That was, so.
I think we can also add to that from the book, there's another example of a choir that has been cancelled in a prison in the States. And again, it's nothing to do with funding, nothing to do with any of the logistics, but just the prison that are saying, no, we can't have this. And I think we're getting a sense through this research that there's a pattern that prisons to begin with will allow a choir or a band or a something musical because they think, oh, that's harmless, it's just a bit of singing or whatever. And then the community that grows around it is then what becomes quite radical, and people start to realise that there are these deeper relationships happening, there are questions being asked about what prison is for anyway, and there are lots of kind of critical voices coming out through that musical practice, both through the music potentially in protest songs, but also just in the community and in the conversations that are happening. And that presents a threat to the prison authorities, who then have the authority themselves to say, no, we're not going to have this anymore. And I think that is definitely a pattern that we've seen repeating. Have we got time for another quick question?
I think one more maybe.
Anyone else?
Somebody at the back there.
I think there's one out of the back here. Yeah.
Sorry, Lucy.
Hello, my name is Áine. I will try to share my thoughts and my experiences and put it into this wonderful research, what you have done. Because I worked in a prison when I was 19 years old, and when I realized how dangerous that was, I quit. Because I didn't have education, I just got a job because they needed people. So that was my first scared moment with prison, and then later on, every time in the city I met people from prison on the subways, everything, so that of course scared me. I was very unprotected, young, very naive girl. So later on I took my education and my master in music, pedagogic, and I also did a work in like a teenager club outside Oslo in Bærum. And this was people on kind of border. What way will they choose? You know, they were given up at school, they were in high school, everything. And we worked with the police in this county. It was like before coming in jail, let's do music and art, you know, like that, because they were young. And I realized what we did, we started communicating with the police, because they was like, yeah, should I rub something or should I not? You know, why do you want to do that? That's, go to jail, what's that? But they didn't have a reality of how far they would go, what will happen. So then I started the communication with the police. I said, I'll ask a lot of questions, it has nothing to do with you, you are anonym. And I started out, if I do this, if I go and do this, what will happen? And they gave them exactly, this will happen, this will happen, this will happen. And the end, we went to have a coffee at the police station in Sandvika, outside Oslo. And then let's go in, and I said, okay, cool, let's go in. And we went to these cells where you come when you're drunk, they pick you up in the street in the night, it stinks like hell. And let's have a coffee in here, and then good time. And they were turned white, everyone, me included, and we went out and we said, so this is what happens. But we made a production, we shared it in high schools. They played rock, they turned it down every time I came, and when I left the room, they turned it up, because they were hard rock musicians, but they kind of thought I'm more sensitive, so they kept it down. But my point is here, it's wonderful what you're sharing, it's beautiful, and it's so rough what you have been doing, because it's so rough to be in a jail. Even though you work there, it's so tough, because you have to balance so many things. Is there anything done? I was 25 when I did this project alone, and it was a success, but I never moved on because it was so heavy to do it alone. But they succeeded, and I never did any signs on it because I moved on with other projects and jobs. But I was wondering, do you know if there's any, coming in earlier in people's life before they are in jail? Is there any kind of way? Because we know in Oslo the criminality goes up, the kids are very young, and I've been thinking, should I call, some politicians and say, I've done this, many years ago, but I did it, and we have a proof, it worked. But I cannot do it alone because it's so huge. and they recognized you, you know. So for me personally, you know, to work in this, it's amazing with the project. But I wonder, is it a way to come in earlier? Is there any signs on this? That's my question, actually. Sorry for taking so much time, but I needed to tell the story.
I mean, I think in many ways this is a perfect segue to actually our next speaker, because there is actually one of the things we're really proud of about this project is one of the things we're collaborating with Music i Fengsel og Frihet about is a project about trying to catch people before prison. So maybe is there a way that you can use music and work with young people who are at risk of criminalization and actually reaching them before they even ever have to go near a prison. And so this is a perfect segue. It's like I planted you. Thank you for this. This is a perfect segue to actually introduce my next speaker, Audun. But before I do that, could I just say a really big thank you to everybody here on the stage for being here. Thanks, and for this conversation. So, thank you very much. And I will introduce Audun now, Audun Reithaug, who is from the organisation Music i Fengsel og Frihet. And they are celebrating their anniversary this year because they have been in existence for 35 years. So Audun, I will let you come up here and...
Hello folks. Now for something completely different. Norwegian prison system. So 35 years ago, that's like in 1991. If you can imagine the state of incarceration policies in Norway back then, it's quite different from what is today. Maybe more or less what they're talking about in the UK and Ireland. But considering it was 1991, it's quite amazing that this woman called Venja Ruud Nilsen, she was gained access to Bredtvet women prison to initiate music tuition with the prisoners. So she was in the prison, she was doing a concert, and some fritidsleder working in the prison said, why don't you get them to play with you instead of playing for them? And for several years, her practice was more or less a one-woman show. She actually got the key to the prison. She could go in there. She could do music with the women in the prison. But it was expanded to prisons all over the country, all over Norway. And this year, we actually celebrate 35th year of music that changed life directions within prisons and beyond. So for you to get an impression of how it looks, I will show you just half a minute of an information film.
Noen ganger føler man seg liten, og ingen sko passer. Det vondt å ikke være der, når du går rundt og tasser.
So I'm not sure if you know the map of Norway that well, but you could see all those lights. Those are prisons where we bring a bit of light into the prisoners. The pictures in this film was all still photos. One of it was actually from the pandemic. You could see the guitar teacher was on a screen for the guitar pupil in the prison. But our method is based on a carefully designed program of music creation and skills development. It's basically for music tuition with a hired professional. That's important. We have hired professionals. Also on the outside. And it's regularly every week. It follows the school year. It's grouped in band. And we also had like individual training, like groups of guitar starters course, or we both do instrument and we do computers. We actually do computers in prison. Mostly DAWs, like making music with Ableton or whatever. or recording your own hip-hop songs. In prison in Norway, you have the schooling and you have the spare time activities. And actually doing music in prison is like in the middle of both schooling and spare time. It's a very highly regarded activity among both the inmates as well as the employees within the prison system. The inmates love it, the employees love it because the inmates gets more easygoing. They can see that they're having their personal growth. They can see that they're learning to learn. They are actually changing their life direction. They're kind of building an identity towards something else than just being a criminal. They get better self-esteem. And all this together makes it a very important and loved activity within the prison system. I'll have this little short film too. This is from a hip-hop studio, which Noah mentioned earlier is participating in. Let me show you this one. So I'm actually using the name music in in custody and liberty in English, although Áine is using a Norwegian name. But this is with the English logo.
Hei, bror! Gåsehud, gåsehud!
Vi holder på med workshop for deltakerne, der de samarbeider om å prøve å lage noen låter.
Dette tror jeg har en stor betydning for den daglige soninga for de som er her.
Mange av de her, de har ikke laget musikk så lenge som meg, men jeg merker at nå som de har holdt på 4 måneder, 6 måneder, så det betyr veldig mye for dem. Og jeg vet ikke helt hva annet alternativ de hadde på en måte gjort da, med tanke om at når de først har funnet denne muligheten her, jeg ser de brenner for det, så det betyr virkelig verden for dem. Det har endret synet deres på hva de vil gjøre. De har lyst til å legge mye av det de pleide å gjøre bak seg, og fokusere på en måte på det man virkelig vil. Den påvirkningen de har hatt på oss ikke noe annet enn positivt. Vi får lyst til å gjøre noe annet med livet når det innenfor musikk. Og vi motiveres veldig til å ta det her seriøst når vi først får den bekreftelsen som vi ubevisst leter etter.
So, this is a video from inside prison. We picked up on these guys and we followed them with the project on the outside. And continuing music after release is a part of bridging the gap. We have a very big difficulty bridging the gap from inside prison to release. You know, all these public agencies trying to cooperate, but don't tell about who's leaving prison now, where you're going, who's following up, and all that system should work. But what we can do, because we hire around music tuitioners, we can have the same person on the inside and the outside. So there's nobody working in a prison that also works on the outside, but we do it with the music tuitions. So we establish a personal contact with the prisoners, and if they want, they can come and continue playing music on the outside. And Venja Ruud Nielsen, our founder, she started running a band of ex-prisoners on the outside. She called it Venja's Harem. This is an all-female band. And she's still doing this band, although the participants changed over the years. And the next film from Anja is about this band. So I'll just give the mic to her. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So this is our final point on the program for today. Is the last very short film that we want to share with you, and it's a film called Real Life. So we hope you enjoy. Thank you so much again for being here. Please do stick around afterwards and come and have a chat with all of us. We'd love to talk to you a bit more. So enjoy real life.
I've been walking down this lonesome road, feeling so alone because you left me. Because you left me. Love and understanding can't help to change my feeling. To change my feeling. And I try to love myself. I try to love myself. That's the real life.
Musikken har vært en del av livet mitt fra jeg var liten, som jeg ofte har brukt som en slags terapi da. Og når jeg da fikk mulighet til å bli med her, så var det jo egentlig ikke noe å tenke på, for da tenkte jeg at den sjansen får du bare en gang. For jeg hadde jo aldri tatt i en bass. Men nå har jeg så stor glede av dette her, at det er mine ukentlige høydepunkter, og jeg har blitt så glad i de jentene jeg spiller med. Og det er så, altså jeg har ikke ord, det betyr alt for meg.
Det er så godt miljø her, synes jeg. Folk vil hverandre vel.
I try to love myself. That's the real.
Akkurat det å si noe om det å ha en fast ting i uka, ikke sikkert du får jobb med en gang du kommer ut, som får deg ut av sofaen og ut av hjemmet ditt. Altså det er alfa og omega. Musikk er mye følelser, og det å oppleve sorg og ensomhet, utenforskap, det å føle seg annerledes, det å kjenne på masse forskjellige typer av frykt, og kunne adressere det gjennom de sangene som også er mye håp i, ikke sant? Det gir på en måte en sånn, det bygger liksom deg litt opp igjen da på innsiden. Det synes jeg veldig, ut meg i hvert fall veldig mye.
A new journey in a prison cell away from normal life. The thoughts in my head, oh my god, it's hell.
Ja, nei, altså, jeg har bare ett ord, og det er mestringsfølelse. For å gjøre det kort for en gang skyld.
He say you must never give up. That life will go on.
Anja har jo en veldig god egenskap da, som jeg undret meg fælt over når jeg ble litt kjent med det, og det er det at hun gir aldri folk opp. Uansett hvor lang tid det tar, så jeg tror jeg kan få ut det. Ja.
Vi kjenner hverandre godt da, på en måte som, ja, vi vet hvem hverandre er, og vi har spilt sammen.
Ja, vi er nesten som en familie.
Ja, familie nummer 2. Ja. Det å ha noe å komme ut til, mer enn bare en jobb, for eksempel. Noen har jo kanskje ikke bare det, men det å ha noe å komme ut til, en hobby som du trives med og liker, jeg er helt sikker på at det kan hindre så mange tilbakefall.
Tenk de stakkarene som skal i fengsel til neste år, hvis de vet om det her, så det er plutselig mindre scary å dra inn der.
The lights, it will hit you soon. 1 year has gone and 1 year has passed. Don't worry girl, you will get there fast. The autumn is gone and winter is over. Spring is glowing and summer is here. In your prison window you can see it clear.
Så er det jo litt sånn forbilde da, for de som ikke er der enda, ikke sant? Oi, jøss, hun holder seg sinne, det er ikke en runde til innom vetven.
Det har noe med den spillegleden vi har. At det er ikke det at vi er superflinke eller har alt på stell eller noe sånt, men den spillegleden, den kjenner folk. Om det er 7000 mennesker, så lover jeg alle 7000 får det med seg. Og det er det viktigste, tenker jeg. Jeg tror jeg satt, altså.
Som jeg har sagt til vennene også, det blir ikke lett å bli kvitt meg. Jeg har spilt i 23 år, og det er umulig å bli kvitt meg. Jeg kommer til å hjemsøke deg med fiolin midt på natta.
To participate in and to feel, like the colleague here said, just to master something and feel that you can master something and feel joy. It's very important. That can be the difference between life and death, actually.